This is the Litigator's Edge podcast with your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, a podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadio. I'm super excited to have Katy Young on the show today. Katy is managing partner of Astra Law Group, an innovative law firm based right here in San Francisco. Katy, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you on the show. I'd like to start by asking you to share either a fun fact about yourself or a cringe joke that you particularly enjoy. Which is it going to be?
Oh, it's going to be a joke.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, so two humpback whales walk into a bar and they sit down and one says, and his friend looks at him and goes, "Damn, man, you are drunk."
I have that's a good one. That's awesome. That's awesome.
You really have to lean into the whale sounds.
Yes, I'll remember that. I'll go back to the recording and see if I can replicate what you just did. It's gonna be hard, but I will try. There's something else that I thought is phenomenal, and that is the name of your law firm. So Astra Legal Group, I think, is really a phenomenal name for a law firm. And can you share a little bit about what the name means, why you chose it, and how it reflects the work that you and your firm do for your clients?
Sure. Well, I'll start with why we chose it because it's kind of a funny story. The founding partners of the firm are David Need, Wendy Hilger, and Katy Young. However, third middle partner, Wendy Hilger, didn't want her name on it because one of her previous partners went to jail for embezzlement. And when you Google her name, his name comes up. So without Hilger, we would have been Need, Hilger, and Young. But without Hilger, we're Need Young or Young Need LLP. And you can't name a business that. So my partner came up with ad astra, which is part of a Latin phrase, per aspera ad astra, means through difficulties to the stars, perfectly describes what we do for our clients. We carry them through very difficult litigation situations to achieve great results.
That's wonderful. And so what sort of work do you do? What sort of clients do you have? And what sort of results have you gotten for them? And I know that's a multi-part question, but we'd love to hear your answer.
Sure. We're all litigators. That's all we do. And we litigate in 4 areas: business litigation, employment litigation, real estate litigation, and trademark litigation. Anything a business owner would need, basically. And we represent kind of small to mid-sized businesses. We have represented big publicly traded companies. One of my biggest clients was the largest publicly traded cannabis company on the face of the earth. But I also represent small mom and pop shops that have one-off labor and employment lawsuits or partnership disputes. People started a business together and can't work together anymore. I do a lot of that work. Anything I personally do is kind of a creature of breach of contract, breach of fiduciary duty, even some securities issues sometimes can be with an LLC, can be a breach of contract. So I love representing clients to really help them get out of difficult litigation situations that they find themselves in.
Very cool. So that's what the
results.
Yes.
You wanted to hear about results?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's go there.
I recently had my biggest trademark win ever, which is very exciting. It was an opposition action before the Trademark Trial and Appeals Board, before the U.S. Patent and Trial Office, Patent and Trademark Office. And it went all the way to trial, and I won the right to register 4 trademarks for a famous hemp activist and his family. It was
wow.
exciting.
That's outstanding. Let's go down that trail a little bit. I've seen in the lead up to this podcast, I was doing some research, and I know that you're active in that space, in cannabis and hemp. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you do there? Obviously, this was one landmark result for your client.
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of got involved in cannabis law in kind of a backwards manner. I had an old friend who became a grower in Oakland. And when I passed the bar in 2009, he was like, "Man, you got to work in cannabis. It's the future." And I was a litigator, and there was no room for civil litigation in cannabis in 2009. No way. But fast forward, and I handled little things for him, like he had a dispute with his employer and he had a dispute with one of his business partners. And I just handled this stuff for him on the side while I worked at this big law firm. And then eventually I went out on my own and I got a referral from a CPA friend to a business in Oakland that was, they helped people file applications to gain cannabis licenses. So they didn't actually touch the plant. They were consultants, and they had a $5 million breach of contract problem. And I handle breach of contract. So I went to my partners and said, what do you think? They're kind of a cannabis company, it's kind of cutting edge. And my partner David said, ask our insurer if they're cool with it. It's fine. So I contacted my insurance agent, and she said, girl, I'm way ahead of you. I've been writing on lines that are good with cannabis for a really long time. And it turns out she ended up being one of the founding sponsors of the Cannabis Bar Association that I ran for 4 years. So I got my first cannabis litigation in 2015, about as early as anyone would have considered litigating over an interest in a cannabis business. It actually, cannabis didn't become the lawful object of contract in California until 2017, when the legislature finally made a carve out saying that despite the federal illegality, it can still be the subject of a contract in California. So I was doing some pretty cutting edge work, kind of Wild West action. And that client base is really interesting, especially back in 2015 through 2018 or so. Lots of what I would call cowboys, people who have been in the cannabis industry for a really long time, and they do business their way. And, now having real business to conduct is very difficult for them, especially when they partner up with folks that come from the investment world or the business world, and it makes for some spicy culture clashes. So I handled lots and lots and lots of partnership disputes for the cannabis industry. And then, the work is kind of dried up because of what's happened with the industry itself in California. The taxation is crushing, legislation is crushing. So I do less and less of this work, but I definitely made a name for myself that way. Not that I don't want to do the work. They're just, no one can afford to go to trial anymore. It's too expensive, and the interests at risk are mostly underwater with tax liens.
Interesting. So building up on that, I think of every attorney who joins me on this podcast as a superhero, and I know you through a common connection, and so every superhero has an origin story. What's yours?
Oh, let's see. So I thought I was going to be a teacher. I grew up in a loud Italian family where arguing with each other was, I guess, a love language. So I grew up knowing how to stand up for myself and how to argue, and I was the only girl and in my household, and I had lots of brothers and uncles, and they were all baseball players, and it was a very male-dominated world for me. And I thought I was going to be a teacher. I went away to college on a water polo scholarship to a teaching university. And my first semester, I remember there was this like philosophy class that everybody had to take, kind of a philosophy class first year. And the final exam was that the professor divided the class in half and assigned each half a philosophy to defend in a mock trial. And I remember I was super sick. I had something called H flu or something like that. And I came into this group project the night before. I hate group projects because I always take over. And I said, here's how we're going to do it. Boom, 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 boom. Who wants to be the lead lawyer? And they're like, you're going to do it. So I went in the next day, sick as a dog. I was defending something I didn't believe in at all, and got a unanimous verdict. And the professor took me aside. I didn't think he liked me before this. He took me aside and he's like, you need to be a lawyer. That was amazing. And I was like, I'm going to be a teacher. That's not something I'm looking to do. And what ended up happening was I started doing my field work in the public schools. I went to school in Stockton, and I'm from like Malibu. So it was a culture shock for me.
Yeah.
And I realized that I don't have the patience or the independent finances to be able to be a teacher. So I went back to school, and I looked at the registrar's office and list of classes to see what else I could take. And I picked up pre-law, and the rest is history.
Wow, what a story. That's amazing. That is absolutely that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. Taking a step back and looking at your career in law so far, what's a case or matter that has fundamentally changed how you approach litigation in general? It could be the one that you mentioned in terms of cannabis, or it could be something else. Just what would you think of something as a moment that shaped your career in terms of litigation?
I had a case I worked on for 5.5 years. Had it from the very beginning all the way through up until trial, and it was one of the most challenging pieces of litigation I'd ever worked on. We sued 17 defendants. Turns out they're the Armenian mafia in Los Angeles. So one thing that I learned and this is probably too late in the case, was that collectability was going to be an issue, right? And any dollar we spent towards trying to get a judgment against these guys was a waste of time because they were never going to pay. They were going to move their assets around and we would chase them forever. So it got to be a exercise in explaining why, even though they were wronged, it doesn't make sense to move forward. And I have that conversation with people so often. I'll get, intake calls and I'll have to explain to them, like, look, there isn't a remedy for every wrong under the law, and justice doesn't exist. If it does, it's prohibitively expensive for most people.
Fascinating. Fascinating. You mentioned on your website that your mantra is, and this may be ironic, it may be not, is that you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. Can you share an example of a shot that you took and it worked out, even though ordinarily you might think it had a low probability of working out?
Yeah, definitely. There are certain motions that are really, really, really hard to win, like an anti-slap motion or a motion for summary judgment. Those are difficult, but sometimes you need to just do a Hail Mary and give it a try. And man, I've had a lot of success recently on some anti-slap motions. There was one that I was particularly concerned about that turned out to be, totally in my favor. And another one recently that was a motion for summary judgment that I was really suspicious about, but it turned out really great. And I actually used an AI tool to help me write that.
That's awesome. We'll come back to that AI tool in a second. So given your, very interesting career, I would say, if you could go back and give advice to yourself as a junior attorney, or to an attorney who's sort of looking to just start to make their mark in this field, what would it be?
I would say become a generalist. If you want to litigate, become a generalist right away. Don't get pigeonholed into asbestos litigation or ethics or something like that. Having a broad spectrum of cases that you've handled as a junior, I think makes you a much more seasoned lawyer later in life. That was advice that I received my first summer between first and second year of law school. I was working for the State Bar's Office of the Chief Trial Counsel, prosecuting attorneys faced with ethical violations. And the mentor attorney that I had there, she said, look, you're great at this. And I was like, oh, I really want to do this. This is so great. Because I have a personal crusade to change people's minds about lawyers. And I just can't stand to see lawyers misbehaving, especially when it harms clients. I mean, lawyers misbehaving to each other, fine, we have thick skin. But, someone that's really harmed a client, I can't live with that. It gives us all a bad name. So the advice that she gave me back then was don't pigeonhole yourself. If you stay here at the state bar, you will be an ethics attorney for the rest of your career, and it's going to be very hard to break out of it. And so that's the advice that I give people. I also, I started out as a litigator, but at some point I left the big law firm and went to go work for a very small firm, and I learned some transactional law there, which I think made me a more well-rounded attorney as well. So I think if you want to be a litigator, you have to start with litigation and learn some transactional later. It's extremely hard to go from transactional to litigation. It's a totally different skill set.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because transactional is maybe more behind the scenes, and litigation is you're really out there and making the arguments.
Right. Some people understand the pace of litigation. Some people do not. The number one rule of litigation is generally anytime there's a piece of paper that comes in, you have to respond to it. There's a date associated with it and a thing you have to write. And some people just can't wrap their heads around that. And it's all statutory deadlines, right? Whereas, like sometimes I'll have a client that we handle litigation for, we are successful, they like my style, and they say, would you please stay on as our general counsel? I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. I don't advertise that I do that kind of work, but I will for the right client if they like me. They'll ask me to write a contract. If it's something simple, no problem, but it can take me a really long time to get to writing a contract just because everything else has a statutory deadline attached to it, whereas what's attached to the transactional deadline is the client expectations. And maybe there's a deal cliff coming up, which you have to work towards or whatever, but it's really hard to maintain both kinds of practice.
That makes sense. If you look at sort of the broad sweep of work that you've done, what's an unconventional litigation strategy that you've employed, whether it be in transaction or litigation, whether it involves technology or not, that gave you a competitive edge in any of the matters that you've worked on?
I think mine is simpler than that. I own this law firm in San Francisco, and my trick is that I hire people who are way smarter than me, and I have them do most of the work, and I just edit it. And that's, I think, the key to success is to work with people who are smarter than you are.
That would be a high bar, but sure. Uh, Cool. All right. So switching gears a little bit and talking about technology, and the use of technology in your practice. From everything I've known about you, you're very tech forward, and your firm is as well. You mentioned the use of that AI tool, and so how do you evaluate which technologies or approaches are worth implementing in your practice? How do you make that determination?
So it's generally been word of mouth, or my staff will bring something to me, say, hey, take a look at this. Or in the case of a tool that I recently purchased, I saw it at a continuing legal education event where it was demoed live. And so, most of my friends are lawyers and law firm business owners, and we talk a lot about this sort of thing. So it's been basically by referral. And then I've met a couple of folks like yourself through my network, and we've beta tested some AI tools for friends.
Yeah, that's cool. Given where we are today with technology and specifically with AI, what is your opinion on where you see the biggest opportunities for innovation in litigation over the next few years?
Oh my goodness. The generative AI does a really good job with repetitive projects like contention interrogatories or requests for admission, these things that are not that brain power intensive, but take a long time for a lawyer or a paralegal to do. Those things I'm finding, especially given my client set, where these are people that are paying out of their own pockets, they're small and medium sized businesses. We do not have an endless litigation budget. And so to be able to give generative AI something very simple to do, that's kind of rote and repetitive has saved my clients a ton of money and saved me a ton of time, and been really useful for the practice. Because I don't do well working with juniors. We're too small. We're only 10 attorneys. And I've worked with junior associates in the past. One out of four worked out and really understood what was going on. I don't have as much time to teach as I would like. So what I've really liked about the use of this kind of technology in my practice is that it's taken some load off of my most junior person who's an eighth year at $545 an hour. I don't need him drafting something that's rote and takes very little brain power. And then my paralegal, she's overloaded anyways, and so I could have her do that at $275 an hour, but I can even beat that price using an AI tool.
Yep. That's fascinating, and it's becoming more and more true, I think, as the quality of the AI tools go up and the price hopefully goes down. So I think, Katie, I know where you stand in terms of the use of AI and technology in terms of your workflows. There's a lot of attorneys on the other side of the spectrum, and so and maybe you encounter them here in San Francisco, and maybe you don't, but what advice would you give to a fellow attorney who expresses concern about the use of AI in their practice and in their workflows?
I would say it is just the same as having a first or second year associate. You need to spend just as much time reviewing their work. However, it's just way cheaper and faster to get the work product for you to edit in the first place. So for, I'd say, solo and small firm practitioners, this is really going to save people time. And, I think that a lot of attorneys have like an ethical issue with it, because we've heard all these stories about what was the word that I heard? Hallucitations.
That's that's
A
that's
hallucinated
awesome.
citation from AI is a hallucitation. And you have to watch out for those things. You have
Of
to watch
course.
out for bogus arguments. And I would say my junior associates have gotten it wrong just as much as generative AI has gotten it wrong. But a couple weeks ago, I was able to bust out a motion for summary judgment that took me a couple hours to put together about 8 pages of input, facts, jury instructions, cases that I wanted it to touch on, an outline of my argument. And I fed that through one of my AI tools. And in 24 hours, with actual lawyers looking at the work product before it came to me, I got a beautiful motion for summary judgment, all with the table of contents, table of authorities, all that work that my staff would have had to have done. And it cost us $280. I spent maybe 4 hours reviewing the work, going through the cases that were cited, checking the cases, checking the arguments, and I was really, really happy with it. In fact, it came up with some arguments that I hadn't made that I was like,
That's awesome. You bring up a great point, right? Just because the work is being done by an AI versus a first year or second year associate, it does not absolve you or any senior partner of the responsibility to review the work anyway.
That's right. The buck stops here. Everyone that has a bar number has the same requirement of diligence and competence. And I think we've seen a lot of stories about lawyers failing diligence and competence by using generative AI, but not checking the work like they normally would. Or maybe, normal for me, maybe those people don't check work. Who knows?
Fair.
The guy who barely passes the bar, we still call him Esquire.
Right. Hey, yeah, there's a broad spectrum of folks in any sort of profession.
That's true.
So just to wrap up now, what's one resource you would recommend to litigators looking to gain an edge in today's legal environment? Could be technology related, could be something else. One or more resources that you think could really help your fellow attorneys.
Oh, definitely technology related. I would say adopting a suite of cloud-based technology with this, even your product, Threadio, I've got to tell you, I took the same depo transcript and ran it through 3 different types of AI that I use. 1, I used CoCounsel. 2, I used Depo Copilot. And 3, I used Threadio. And I have to say the Threadio output was the absolute king, best, so good. So good. And it was one of those, like what I was talking about, where it's just rote. Like your product does the page line summaries for the depositions, and that amount of work right there, that represents 8 hours of work that a junior associate would do preparing for trial, and that's several $1,000s worth of work right there that your product does in the snap of a finger. And I think for practitioners that are not embracing technology, even with something as simple as a practice management software. I have a friend that owns a law firm here in the town that I live in, not in San Francisco, but about 45 minutes outside the city. And she's just now getting a computerized practice management software. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Huh? And she's struggling to get things into this practice management software and learn to use it. Whereas my law firm was born in the cloud. We use Clio, it's cloud, Dropbox, cloud, Microsoft 360, Office 365. Everything we do is cloud. All of our software applications, our HR software, everything. And so I can work from anywhere in the world, and so can anyone on my staff. And so when COVID hit, actually, we'd done a work from home stress test to make sure that we would all be able to do it easily, because we heard shutdown was coming. And I remember it was a Monday when the city of San Francisco announced, we're closing offices.
Right.
That Friday before, I had done the work from home stress test and sent everybody whatever computer they needed, whatever setup they needed to make their home office good. And so that Friday we stayed home and we didn't go back to the office until never. I'm subletting out my office space now because I started hiring people who live outside of the Bay Area.
Right.
And we work seamlessly, no problem, because of the ease of these collaboration tools.
That's amazing. I have to say, for the record, 2 things. One is thank you so much, Katy, for the kind words for Threadio. And number 2, I had no idea you were going to say that. So I just want to put that. So I
know
really
you had no idea I was going to say that. I was saving that for you. I had a lot of fun with it. Our mutual connection, her and I were chatting, and she said her firm just spent a bunch of money on CoCounsel. I said, CoCounsel is BS. Look at your friend's product. It's way better. And so I gave her the 3 analyses that I had done. I attached them all to the same email and said, look at what CoCounsel can do versus look at what Depo Copilot can do versus look at what Threadio can do. So I know her firm is probably looking at your product right now.
I appreciate that. You made my day, Katie. With that, but thank you so much. Final question before we wrap up here. Is there a question I should have asked you on any of the items that we spoke about, but I didn't?
Are you having fun? Well, I'm definitely having fun. And I gotta say, when I do get a chance to use one of these AI tools, I'm so excited by it that like I'm like, oh, today I get to play with this thing. Oh, how fun. And it's really a blast for me because
Yeah,
it's novel and it's exciting. And I'm playing around with it. I'm trying to incorporate this stuff into my daily practice, but making sure that I understand it correctly and bringing my staff to some of these demos so they can see. And we all think it's pretty cool.
it's awesome. Well, that's a fun way to end today's podcast. So thank you so much again, Katie, for your time. I had a wonderful time speaking with you on all the different things that we spoke about, and I'm sure our audience will as well. So thanks so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Nice chatting with you.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Litigator's Edge podcast, brought to you by Threadio.